Nowadays, there's more global interaction than ever before. Advances in technologies such as the computer, internet, and mobile phones made global communication easier, and also the invention of airplanes and other ways of transportation made human global movement easier. This interconnectedness trickles down in the way people view the world. It gets a bit smaller. The rigid national frontiers seems to fade, what gives people the option to travel, work, and live across national borders. Mind that this globalization is a two-sided story, whereby upscaling and downscaling go hand in hand. So on the one hand, it gives people the opportunity to explore the boundaries of this global village, but this broadening of their horizons could also be a source of uncertainty. If a person goes abroad and finds themselves in a new social context, they might feel the need to redefine their personal identity and to find out how they fit in their new environment. Let us first have a look at the concepts involved with this process of identity formation. In the studies of nationalism, the terms national identity and national character are used very often. They are related to each other, but what do they actually mean? National identity is the sense of a nation as a cohesive whole and is represented by a distinctive tradition, culture, and language. So in other words, we can see a national identity, and also identity an zich for that matter, as a situation where a person is constructed by different pieces of Lego. Every piece of Lego stands for a different aspect of one's identity. The same piece of Lego exists in different colors, but also the same colored piece of Lego exists in different shapes and sizes. So aspects of identity such as language, tradition, and culture can all be seen as different Lego bricks in different sizes and different colors. Therefore, endless combinations are possible, and if a person finds a certain piece of Lego unfitting, he can remove it or replace it for another. Identity is thus viewed as constructed and also subject to one's perspective. People use these stereotypes as a social shortcut to position the behavior of a person of an unknown culture in their own social framework. National characters are used to emphasize the difference between nations, but at the same time obscure the differences within a country. For example, the French are regarded as being romantic and the English all like tea. What we want to focus on now is the fluidity of the concept of identity. We have determined it is something that is constructed and subject to one's perspective. But does the identity change when someone is placed in a completely new social environment? Our main question therefore is, to what extent is identity, and national identity in particular, liable to change? This is what we want to find out. In this short study, we use expats to investigate certain aspects of their national identity. To what extent do they import aspects of their native culture to their new country of residence? And furthermore, does their feeling of belonging change after living abroad for a long time? What is the culture or nature that they really feel affiliated to, and where do they feel at home? To answer these questions, we are comparing two individuals raised both in an expat family. First, we listen to Robin, a 23-year-old girl who lived abroad until the age of 16. And she got an international and English education until university. Secondly, we listen to Jochem, a 23-year-old boy who also lived abroad until his late teens. But in opposition to Robin, Jochem went to Dutch schools, except for 3 years of Flemish education. But firstly, listen to Robin.
My Dutch identity whilst living abroad was not that important to me. I grew up in an international environment. I think I must have gained a global identity as I embraced the traditions and values from other countries. I realized this every time when I returned back to the Netherlands. I felt estranged from my Dutch peers. I wasn't really familiar with any music or TV shows that they'd been viewing. I gained a little bit of Dutch tradition through my mother. She was always very keen to express our Dutchness. In Nigeria, we lived in a compound with dozens of other expat families. Sinterklaas also came to our compound, and I also made crazy-looking surprises. In Moscow, we would celebrate Queen's Day. You must know that when I lived in Holland, I lived in an area with only international students. I did not really experience the whole Dutch culture at all. Queen's Day, I used to celebrate with everyone except for the Dutch. You could say that I was a tourist in my own country. Language has proved to be a defining way to express my identity. However, I use both Dutch and English to express myself. I notice that on a daily basis, even though I live in the Netherlands now, I still speak a lot of English, and whenever I'm emotional, I return to English, not Dutch. Dutch sarcasm was really hard for me to follow when I started studying in Amsterdam. Now it is not. I've always thought if you're able to make jokes and understand sarcasm, then you understand the people. In my opinion, passports, identity cards, a country of heritage are all the basis to fall onto in times of uncertainty. Saying you're Dutch isn't really important to me because I do feel Dutch, and defining characteristics such as language and traditions have blurred with other identities. I've become a mixture of various cultures, which might be confusing to some, but very comfortable for myself.
So this was Robin. We're now going to listen to Jochem.
Hi, my name is Jochem and I'm a Dutchman raised in Belgium. In addition, I've lived a few years of my childhood in Singapore. During my first years at primary school, I learned to be bilingual in Dutch and Flemish. I spoke Dutch at home and Flemish at school with my Belgian friends. And during my time in Singapore, I've also learned to speak English. When I returned to a Belgian school for a few years in my teens, my teacher thought of me as that rude Dutch boy, even though I spoke Flemish and lived in Belgium. I think it was because I wasn't used to the Belgian scholarly hierarchy. There are some Dutch traditions we have maintained whilst living in Belgium and Singapore. For example, Sinterklaas, also celebrated in Belgium but in a slightly different way, was celebrated by us in the Dutch way, in the evening and with poems and presents. Sinterklaas even came to Singapore with his steamboat. Other Dutch festivals such as Queen's Day, Leiden's Ontzet, were celebrated as well in Singapore. The funny thing is that I've never celebrated Leiden's Ontzet since I've left Singapore. I think because we lived in an all-Dutch expatriate community that we wanted to celebrate Dutch traditions along with our other Dutch neighbors. Our eating habits have remained the same everywhere I lived. My whole life I had chocolate sprinkles for breakfast, and my mother never stopped making stamppot and rookworst once in a while. Products that we couldn't buy abroad, like Dutch cheese or drop, were imported by acquaintances who visited us from Europe. You can thus say that I hang on to Dutch tradition and eating habits whilst living abroad in Singapore and also during my time being a Dutch boy living in Belgium. So, even though I have lived abroad until I went to a Dutch university when I was the age of 19, I feel first and foremost Dutch. I think this is mostly because my parents are both completely Dutch and they passed on their traditions on to us. But also because, for example, my teachers still viewed me as a bold and rude Dutch boy, even though I spoke Flemish and had Belgian friends. On the other hand, when it suits me, I can fall back onto my backup identities, as I like to call it. I'm, for example, a specialist in Indonesian food, can't live a day without a good spicy sambal, and now that the Dutch dropped out of the European Championship of Football, I'm going to cheer for the Red Devils.
To find out in what way Robin and Jochem used expats of their national identity during their time abroad, and to find out if their perception of their national identity changed after when returning to Holland, it is wisely to compare the two. First of all, Robin went only to international and English schools. She was almost never surrounded by other Dutch people, except her family. This is the reason why she feels more like she has a global identity than a Dutch identity. Even when she lived in Holland, she went to an international high school. Now at university, it is the first time she is among a majority of Dutch people, but she expresses herself better in English. She thus participates in Dutch traditions as Sinterklaas and King's Day, but only with other international people. That is why she considers herself as an outsider in her own country. She also addresses that when she is emotional, she turns to English. We can conclude from this that her identity is mainly influenced by her international environment. She still feels affiliated with her Dutch nationality and traditions that were passed on by her parents, but she gave these Dutch traditions an international twist to make it fit in her social framework. Jochem, on the other hand, was always mainly surrounded by Dutch people, even when living abroad. In Singapore, he lived in an all-Dutch expatriate community, and when he went to school in Belgium for 3 years, he had a lot of Dutch friends. From high school onwards, he even traveled to the Netherlands to go to a Dutch school. Because of this, Jochem feels primarily Dutch and considers Dutch his native language, in contrast to Robin, who feels most at ease speaking English. So what can we conclude by comparing these experiences from Jochem and Jochem? We can conclude that their change in their global scope promotes a redefinition of their feeling of belonging and puts pressure on the question of their true nature and meaning of their own identity. In some cases, they fall back on the familiar and they show a revival of national reflexes. But the main conclusion is that their environment constructed their national feelings towards their national identity. So we can say that even if you are born in the Netherlands and having the Dutch identity, it doesn't necessarily mean you feel attached to it when you are living abroad. It depends on the fact if there are other people around you who are from the same nationality and want to maintain that identity, or if you are with people who have the same feeling of a global identity. So we can say that your environment had a big influence on the liability of your national identity.